For the first time since this issue came back into the forefront, Daniel Snyder takes a public stance, and in his words, he says he will never change the name of the team.
Snyder says, quote, "We'll never change the name. It's that simple. Never. You can use caps."
Redskins owner Dan Snyder says he will never change the team name.
They were the Washington Redskins from 1933 to 2019. In 2020 and 2021, they were the Washington football team. In 2022, they became the Washington Commanders. 3 names in 3 years, and 2 disastrous rebrands. And they weren't cheap. I'm not talking about just money. Today, we're looking at the true cost of the failed Washington Commanders rebrand, and that's coming up right after this. Winter is finally sort of over, and you know what that means. It's time to show off that body you've been working on all this time. What's that? You're still out of shape? Guess what? You might look frumpy right now, but with Manscaped, at least you can smell good. Introducing the Ultra Premium Collection, which includes body wash and refined cologne scent, hydrating body spray, aluminum-free deodorant, moisturizing lip balm, and for those who aren't follically challenged like me, 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner. Yes, Manscaped has expanded their product line beyond just shaving balls, so you can take their products with you at the gym. I mean, you could before, but let's not make the locker room any more awkward than it has to be. My absolute favorite is the new body wash. It goes on smooth and smells freaking great. It's infused with aloe vera and sea salt to keep that man skin from cracking. Like I said, we have all these other products available to you now. You can get the Ultra Premium Collection by going to manscaped.com/5-points and get 20% off your order and free international shipping. Plus, if you sign up for the Peak Hygiene Plan, you can get all these products replenished on your schedule and right to your door. Again, that's manscaped.com/5-points from the link below to get 20% off your order and free international shipping. Manscaped.com, the leader in men's grooming. Now, beyond the groin. Before we get to Washington Commander branded Teslas on a mission of doom, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, the history of the name. In the far north of Newfoundland, the Beothuk tribe painted their bodies with red ochre. Nearby, white settlers in Canada referred to them as red men. Throughout the 1700s, the term red man evolved into red skin, a moniker Native Americans used to identify and distinguish themselves from the white Europeans who had sailed to North America and began populating the continent. The first official use of the word redskin came in 1769 as part of negotiations between the Piankashaws of the Midwest and Colonel John Wilkins of the British Army. It was until 1823, however, that redskin entered the popular lexicon in North America. Author James Fenimore Cooper published The Pioneers, a novel that was surprisingly sympathetic towards Native Americans. A few decades later, the term started to take a more negative connotation. L. Frank Baum, who later authored The Wizard of Oz, celebrated the death of Sitting Bull at the Battle of Wounded Knee, writing, "With his fall, the nobility of the redskin is extinguished, and what few are left are a pack of whining curs who lick the hand that smites them." Alright, so who knew L. Frank Baum was kind of a dick? The term was still being used with a somewhat neutral connotation, but that pendulum was starting to swing to the other side. In 1932, a Tom and Jerry cartoon called Redskin Blues depicted Native Americans in a stereotypical manner, primitive and violent. A year after that cartoon, George Preston Marshall, the owner of the then Boston Braves, changed his team's name to the Boston Redskins. According to the team, Washington adopted the name in honor of former coach William Lone Star Dietz, who identified as Native American. Allegedly, George Preston Marshall would require Lone Star to wear a Sioux headdress on the sidelines, and he wanted players to wear war paint on the fields. Of course, this was all according to team attorneys, who almost a century later wanted to establish that the name Redskins was adopted as a badge of honor rather than a racial epithet. But there are plenty of theories that Lone Star Dietz wasn't Native American at all. Some historians claim that Dietz was simply a German American who wanted to play football with a Native American identity to cash in on the fame of one of his good friends, Jim Thorpe. The history is foggy at best, but team lawyers tried to twist it in a way that helped the team keep their name. And for a while, it worked. Until, of course, it didn't. The name redacted. In 2013, the Washington then Redskins avoided an all-out assault by the media, DC Council, and Native American activists who fought to change the name. It felt like Dan Snyder had won, this time for good. But the tide had shifted. Multiple publications like Slate and the New Republic decided they would no longer refer to the team by their name, but rather as the Washington NFL team. Furthermore, from 1971 to 2013, roughly 2/3 of amateur athletic teams bearing Native American iconography changed their names and logos. While the world was shifting around them, Washington remained on an island. For another 7 years, the issue stayed dormant. Fringe publications would call the team whatever they wished, but it looked like the name Redskins was here to stay. Of course, in 2020, everything changed.
Large crowds of demonstrators in multiple cities getting more violent following the death of George Floyd.
As pressure mounted, Dan Snyder had nowhere to hide. Scrutiny was one thing, and Snyder had shown that he was shameless when it came to that. But money is far more persuasive. In July of 2020, the holy trinity of NFL sponsors spoke up. Nike, Pepsi, and FedEx publicly pressured Washington into a name change. Finally, after 90 years, the name Redskins was gone. For 2 seasons, they would be known as the Washington football team. This was, of course, designed as a placeholder name. Some fans grew attached to the generic titles, citing inspiration from European soccer clubs, but many Washington fans were caught up in the drawn-out, at times comical search for a permanent moniker. Red Wolves, Red Hogs, Sentinels, Presidents, Admirals. These were just some of the potential names for Washington as they sought to rebrand their team. However, on February 2nd, 2022, they pulled the trigger after a year and a half of being known as just the Washington football team. Now they were the Commanders, a new name, new logos, and new uniforms.
The Commanders is the new name? The Commanders, bro.
For the second time in under 2 years, they had rebranded. That can't be cheap, can it? So let's finally answer the question. What did these rebrands cost? Let's start with the first one. When the Washington Redskins became the Washington football team, it was designed as a placeholder move, but they still had to rebrand, remarket, and most importantly, they had to win over a fan base whose support was and is still waning. There are a few considerations for a temporary rebrand. First of all, you have the fact that you're taking a multi-million-dollar process and multiplying it times 2 over the course of 569 days. Nice. That's a hefty price tag. It's fair to assume that since the transition from Redskins to football team was so quick, the rebrand might land on the cheaper side of the cost spectrum. Likely in the ballpark of $10 million or less. Because the second rebrand took so long and involved several outside consults and extensive research, the cost of that one likely exceeded $20 million. All in all, because no official figures are available to the public, it's safe to assume the final bill ran around $30 to $40 million. No small chunk of change. But here's the eye-opening catch. The Washington Commanders are worth roughly $3.5 billion. They were the first NFL franchise to be valued at $1 billion, but their growth relative to other teams has slowed down over the last 2 decades. To put it simply, they couldn't afford not to rebrand. And they needed the placeholder name to satisfy sponsors like FedEx, who would have cost the team $10 million per season had they removed their naming rights on the stadium. Without sponsorships, the team would be bleeding money in a league that seems to be printing more and more cash every season. The placeholder bought them time and money to make a permanent change to the Commanders, a change that could actually become a windfall for Daniel Snyder, and thanks to revenue sharing, the NFL as a whole. Yeah, after all this, that pig still somehow wins. Changing signage and logos comes at a one-time fee, but merchandise is forever. The fan base, apart from a few stubborn old-timers, will likely spring to replace their Redskins gear with Commanders gear, while the Washington football team becomes instant memorabilia that can be sold as vintage merch to the ironic hipster industrial complex. Washington and the rest of the NFL was going to lose money if they stuck with their old name. Not to mention the Commanders will no longer have to retain expensive lawyers that will fight for the right to keep an outdated name. Now they only need to retain expensive lawyers to settle their sexual harassment lawsuits. Of course, had Dan Snyder and the team had a contingency plan in place from the get-go, he could have avoided doing 2 rebrands, and that would have saved the team the cost of the first rebrand. But since Daniel Snyder is an arrogant prick who said he would never change the name, of course he didn't have a plan in place. Those words cost him millions of dollars, but in the long run, he wins again. Maybe we'll never know the true monetary cost of the rebrand, but if I were a fan of the team, I'd have to question if it were my soul.
We are commanders. Bum, ba, dum, bum, 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 bum. And there you have it.